All right. Hello and welcome, everybody. This is Anas with CT4L Consulting with another video series. This series is going to talk about compensating the sales team. And it's probably one of the most important things that you could do in optimizing, enhancing your sales. Compensation, and it's a large portion of your budget. And compensating the sales team literally drives the behavior of the sales team. However you design the compensation structure, this is how you're going to get the behavior on the sales floor and then on the field. It drives the behavior of your sales team. So what are the challenges that you're facing and we're facing as a multi-unit wireless retailer? The challenges that I see today talking to multiple ARs and challenges that I faced myself before having the capacity to build the compensation structure that we have today at CT4L. But the first challenge that I have seen, and I'm guilty of this, is that a compensation structure or commission structure is copied and pasted from somebody else. Basically, you talk to other operators and then you ask them, what are you guys doing? And you think that they're bigger than you and they're better than you. And then you just say, if it works for them, why wouldn't it work for me? So that's one. And it's the biggest mistake that you could actually make. The second one is usually those ad hoc or copied and pasted compensation, there's no way, and I haven't been able to see somebody that was able to model the impact on the bottom line. There's no connection between the impact on the bottom line and the money that's being spent on compensation. And third, and I've seen this a lot, is way too much manual labor to calculate, and it puts a lot of strains on your back office team, and it is a very cumbersome process. And fourth, there is unintended consequences to multiple compensation structures where you want to do one thing, you're hoping for one thing, but the sales team is behaving differently because you're incentivizing something and you didn't see it coming, and they behave differently. So that's what I have seen is a lot of challenges. For example, I've seen folks that compensate for accessories but not for service fees, and what ended up happening is that some of the sales reps will divert the money from the service fees or activation / upgrade fees into accessories. That's an unintended consequence of the compensation structure. And fifth, I have seen way too many complicated compensation structure where folks are just not really able to understand. It has to be simple and people can understand. And the last thing, and probably the most important thing, is that there is a misalignment between the company's strategic objective and the structure. A compensation structure should drive the strategic objective of the organizations. And so in this video today, I'm going to share a high level view of what the right comp plan would look like and what are the steps that you could take to build that kind of compensation structure in your own organization. And there will be more details on how you could do each and every single step. The right compensation plan should be specifically designed for your organization. What I mean by that is you should know and look at your overall performance and the average for your key metrics, and then say, this is where I am today, and a compensation structure needs to be designed specifically to drive specific measures based on where you are today and where you need to be. That's the most important thing. And then modelability. So I'm inventing this word apparently because it doesn't exist. And you want to be able to model how the compensation structure is impacting your bottom line. You should be able to tie that to your P&L statement or another model, whatever it is. You should be able to play around with your model in order for you to see how different payout levels and how different changes in productivity, how that's going to impact your overall gross profit, and how will that end up on the bottom line. And third, it needs to be automated. If you don't have an automated compensation structure, there is going to be way too much administrative work, and the sales team isn't going to trust the work that's being done. The biggest thing that you can do is making sure that your sales team trusts the reporting and trusts the automation process, and it needs to be easily accessible for them. And you want to study all of the consequences that come with creating a new comp structure and try to minimize them to the best of your ability. There's always going to be something or somebody that's going to come up with something that you haven't really thought of, and you just want to make sure that you're going through the scenarios to minimize that. And as I said, it's too complicated. Make sure that people understand the compensation structure. And you want to make sure that you want to balance the quality and the quantity. So it's not only good to get the volume, there are specific quality measures that you want to make sure that the compensation structure is balancing between. And lastly, and probably most importantly, is aligning the all the stakeholders involved, the objective and the interest of all, the company's objective, your objective as an operator, and the carrier's objective, and the front line and the seller's employees. If you don't have this alignment in the compensation structure, you are going to have a disconnect somewhere, and that's not going to be good for everybody. So what are the steps that you could take today to build the compensation? Or how would you actually think about a compensation structure, and how do you design it? There is this thing called first principles that scientists in general like to use, and physicists in particular. They love looking at things from a first principles perspective. And first principles is like really breaking things down to its most fundamental units. And breaking a problem. If you have a problem, you break it down to its most fundamental units, and then try to assemble it from there and understand how you could solve the problem. And in the example of a wireless operator, you got your company, and then you got your district, and then you got your store, and you have your employees, and then you have an invoice, and then you have SKU. So when you look at the biggest and most fundamental unit from a first principles perspective, it's your SKU. Now you want to look at SKU, and then you want to look at how do you translate your SKUs into gross profit. And I'm specifically saying gross profit because I hate when people say, oh, revenues, and they treat revenues as if it's gross profit, and vice versa. Those terms are not the same. Gross profit is different than revenue. So you want to look at gross profit and translate your SKUs. What is how each SKU is generating gross profit? Now, once you look at that, you'll see that it's very complicated to try to build a compensation structure around SKUs. And I have seen people do that, where they'll say, you know what, if you are doing if you're doing a rate plan of this, you'll get $2. If you're doing an upgrade, you'll get $3. And it just gets way too complicated because you have too many tiers and way too many things going on. So what I recommend is to go up a level from the SKU level and start calculating gross profit on an invoice level. So once you have that calculation, once you are able to generate your gross profit based on an invoice level, you can build your entire compensation structure around each invoice and how much gross profit it is generating. And then you could say, you know what, the period that I'm looking at is on a weekly basis. If you compensate your sales force on a weekly basis, we do that at CP4L, and our sales team love it. Or you could say, you know what, I'm going to gather and consolidate gross profit on a monthly basis and compensate my team based on that. And then you build a compensation structure that's centered around volume and quality. Now, I've talked to some people, and they don't like sharing gross profit numbers with their employees. And if you are one of those folks, this video is not for you, because this entire compensation structure is literally about driving and aligning the objective of the organizations with the employees, and make sure that your employees understand how the company makes money so that you're able to align those objectives. And this alignment will never happen if you're doing it on a revenue based or on a SKU level based, because you're going to always have unintended consequences. But once you put it on a gross profit and you tie it in with the quality, it's going to be a game changer for you, and you'll have employees that are behaving as owners, because then they're invested in the success of the sale or whatever invoice that they're selling. So how do you start, and what do you do? First, let's look at the matrix between a quality gross profit per box and volume box, and see what that looks like. So if we're looking at gross profit model, then you have the quality on this axis, and then you'll have your quantity on this axis. So what I let's say, for example, let's take a weekly productivity for an employee, and this is how many, these are volume boxes, this is how many phones they're selling, the range of the phones that they're selling in a given week. So from 0 here to 50 boxes here, that's a high volume, a high producing individual. And this is the quality of the gross profit going from, gross profit per box, going from 0 to 200. And what you really are trying to do is trying to figure out how do you get from, the best compensation structure is how, or the best sellers are those that are increasing the volume going here, and then increasing the quality of every box that they're selling, or every invoice that they're selling. You will have some folks that are low volume producer and low quality producers, and this is not what you want. This is somebody that's in this corner. But sometimes you'll have somebody that's generating a high quality invoice or high quality box sale, gross profit per box, but they're not producing any volume. The chances are you are here. Like, you got your average employee is doing 10 to 15 boxes a week, and they are here, especially if you're in the prepaid segment of the wireless industry. And if you're in the postpaid, add $50 to $60, give or take. And what you are trying to accomplish is how do you figure out how do you increase your volume while at the same time increasing the quality of your sale, or like your margins, however you want to look at it. And this is kind of like the mirage, or like the utopia, like getting the highest gross profit per box possible and the highest volume possible for every single employee in the organization. This is, of course, impossible for everybody in the organization to do, but you're hoping that you can climb somewhere around here, that you're saving and you're studying your volume along with the gross profit. So then thinking about it from that perspective, if you have an employee, if your average company is doing gross profit per box, you're generating $100, and the average employee is selling 15 boxes, their average weekly gross profit is $1,500. So once you start thinking about it that way, then it really becomes clear how you can drive and build a compensation structure that's centered around that allows you to figure out how to study the relationship between volume and between the quality or the margins that you're doing. So what can you do, and what are the steps that you could take to build a compensation structure that can achieve the objectives that I talked about earlier? Well, first thing, of course, is that you need to do data gathering. And what the data that you need to gather in order for you to come up with the right compensation structure based on the gross profit, the way that I described it, you need to have a list of all of your employees. You could go back to the past 12 months and then consolidate each employee's numbers on a weekly basis. So you need to have each employee and then how many boxes they sold in week 1 and week 2 and so on and so forth. And so you need to have boxes, how many phones, you need to know the gross profit per box. You also need to have how much commission you paid in that week for that particular employee. You need to know their weekly gross profit, which is easy to get because you can just multiply the weekly boxes with the gross profit per box numbers. And then you need to know the percent of gross profit paid, and this is also a calculated measure that you get. And lastly, and probably most important, is knowing you should have access to the discount information. How much is your employee discounting for every box that they're selling, so that you can translate that into discount per box and allow you to model a compensation structure. So you have to have this data, and if you're using RQ or you're using whatever point of sale, you should be able to get that information. It might be, and this is probably whenever you're looking at any modeling exercise, the data gathering and cleansing of the data is the longest step. It's about 90% of the work, and the rest of it is just really much easier. And you got to make sure that you are cleaning your data, that you don't have any outlier or any issues. And for me, what I have done when I made the study is that I excluded anybody that clocked in less than 10 hours or 15 hours in a given week, to make sure that I'm only studying the numbers that were, full-time employees, or the numbers that, were active. Because if you don't do that, you may have some dirty data that's going to skew your numbers. So once you have your data, once you have all of the stuff that you need, what you want to do is perform descriptive statistics on this data. And descriptive statistics for those of you who don't really like the technicalities of statistics, this might sound boring or confusing for you. It's okay. Basically, what you need to know is that you want to know on the data that I just described, gross profit in a given week, gross profit per box, and the commission percentage paid. You need to know the distribution of your sales force on that. And you need to know the mean, you need to know the standard deviation, you need to know the kind of skewness of the data that you are experiencing. And we have something called the kurtosis, like how is the peak of your graph, how is it behaving? Is it a flat line? If it's a bell-shaped curve? Those things you have to know in order for you to be able to do really exactly everything that you need to do on that. Let me just, for example, give you an idea of what your distribution could look like. So if you're looking at the gross profit, maybe your distribution could look something like this with a right tail skew, or it depends on, maybe it will look like a normal distribution, something like that. And you'll have maybe $1,500 here, average gross profit per week, or you'll have, whatever number it is. You need to be able to know exactly what you mean and what kind of distribution that you're dealing with, because the distribution of your sales force is going to really dictate how you design a compensation structure, and it's going to dictate a lot of the tiers that you're creating. And basically, once you have your gross profit average, remember, how does gross profit come about? Well, it's how many boxes you have times the gross profit per box number. What you're trying to do is, once you have your average and once you have your distribution, you're trying to improve this number by 10 or 15%. And so you design and you create a compensation table that's based on the gross profit, weekly gross profit, and then you can add a quality measure to it called gross profit per box, and you design the compensation structure to help you get that 10, 15%. And that's why I said earlier that the compensation structure has to be very specific to the organization, because in your case, you may be at $1,500 gross profit average per employee. Somebody else could be at $1,700. Somebody else could be at $1,000. And that's why you have to build the table, because your table is going to look like different for somebody that has $1,000 average versus somebody that has $1,700 gross profit average. So if you don't do that, if you're not looking at it from specifically designed for your organization, you're going to face a lot of issues. So you need to have all of this. And obviously, one last thing that I want to mention about it is, like, you need to have the range. Then this allows you to study outliers and a lot of other things in the process. So you now have, once you have the descriptive statistics, once you know what your average distribution is and what is, how many employees, or what the percentage of your employees that are between $0 to $1,000 in gross profit. Let's say that your 30% of your sales force is in that distribution, and then another third is between 1,000 and 1,500, and so on and so forth. Then you're able to create a compensation table, and the compensation table would look something similar to this. So your compensation table would look something like that. You look at it and you say, depending on what your average number is, you create it. So you say $0 to $1,000 gross profit, you're giving, I don't know, whatever, 4% of your gross profit. 1,000 to 2,000, you're giving 6%. And obviously these numbers, you have to model them in order for you to understand how this whole process is going to work. And then you can go here and then create another tier. And I'm just throwing these numbers out there just to give you an idea of what that process looks like. And then you can go here and do 8% of your gross profit, and so on and so forth. So this is one component of your compensation table, and this is your volume component. The other component is the quality. And you can say, you know what, if your average, say that, and this is what we have done. We looked at what our average is for gross profit per box, And this is our average for 2021. It was X, and then but I want X. I want to improve that by 15% or by 20%. So my average, then I can create an accelerator or decelerator. I say if you are below X times 15%, then you lose 20% of your commission, or you lose 30% of your commission. And as you improve the gross profit per box numbers, you can gain more potential, and you can even increase your commission that you're making here by as much as 50%, or however you want it. But this is, your table has to have the volume, and it has to have the quality of your gross profit per box number, and then accelerate or decelerate the commission based on that. So you create your compensation table, and the compensation table, as I mentioned earlier, it should have the tier levels, it should have the range of the table, and then you should know what your percent of gross profit is. So you have done, you have your table, and then you have to do what, model the impact on each and every single employee. And this is a very important step, because you want to make sure that the employees that are driving healthy behaviors and are meeting your strategic objective as an organization, they are rewarded on this compensation structure. And the employees that are not meeting your strategic objective, that they are not rewarded and in some ways penalized. And so what you're doing is you're literally taking from, it's a zero-sum game almost, especially if things are really tight. You're taking money from employees that are having poor sales, or over discounting, or not meeting the margins that you're looking for, productivity, and you're giving that to employees that are meeting the objective. And what ends up happening is that everybody after a period of time you'll level up your entire organization to do the behavior that you're looking for. And then you obviously need to model that impact of it on the bottom line and see how that looks like. And so what are the models or the tools that you could use to study the impact on each employee on the bottom line? There are really three tools that I use to build and model the compensation structure. There's regression analysis that you could use. There is a sensitivity tables analysis that you can create. And there is something that I learned in my days of being in chemistry, a Monte Carlo simulation that you could actually create to make sure that you have the right model and you have the right compensation structure. Without doing these confirmation, without doing these things, you're kind of shooting from the hip, and you won't really have an exact science of what your compensation structure is going to do or the impact that it's going to have. In my next videos of these series, I'm going to cover exactly this. I'll walk you through the data gathering process and how I make the descriptive analysis in Excel. And then I'll also walk you through my regression analysis, sensitivity analysis, and the Monte Carlo simulations, all of that in details for each. So if you're looking for more details, tune in when I report the details on how to create a compensation structure. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope that you enjoyed this segment, and look forward to sharing the details of a comp structure creation in the next